Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day to day lives. Let's start with the video. My little sister Cassie has always been that one kid who used to always be sick during her childhood. She was also the youngest. Our age gap wasn't huge. We just have a 4 year age difference, but it's still there. Well, like I mentioned, Cassie used to fall sick a lot. So much so that at one point my parents really thought that she wouldn't be with us for a long time. So they started spoiling her. She became their priority, and although that was understandable to me, they made her their priority at the expense of me. Coming from a lower middle class family, my family obviously could not afford to spoil both my sister and I. So they took away what little they gave me to begin with and gave it all to my sister. This also included their time, love, and attention. I was so excluded that the only time the two of them ever even looked at me was when they needed someone to look after Cassie. Well, I turned a blind eye to all of this. I tried so hard to convince myself that there was nothing wrong with all this. This was normal in the households with children who were sick, and I sort of made it my mentality until a couple of days ago when I reached my breaking point. You see, Cassie's health improved when she grew older, and by the time she had gotten into high school, it was like she had become like all the normal kids with a normal, healthy lifestyle. To my parents' credit, they started to treat her normally here onwards. I mean, at least they tried, but failed miserably because it had become too late to undo years worth of parenting her with basically no boundaries. They had created one of the most entitled children I have ever come across. So, my sister's spoiled, entitled behavior became a problem to both my parents and I. As an adult in college, earning some of my own money, I basically had to enable this behavior too. I know this is probably when I should have cut contact, but the 18-year-old me, who was burnt out from college, work, and life in general, had no energy to fight. So I just gave in. Years passed this way, and currently Cassie is 24 years old and is a mother of two kids. Both have different fathers who aren't interested in being a part of the kids' lives. Cassie dropped out of college in her second year because it was hard juggling to be a parent and a student. Well, this made no sense because my nephew was living with my parents at that time, but, anyways. Hell, even her tuition fees were paid by my parents and I. So Cassie has no job at 24, is dating a deadbeat, and has been living with my parents until now. I said until now because recently Cassie was made to move in with me because a fight broke out between her and my parents. My parents called her out on her entitled behavior. Very early, I know. And apparently, this hurt her ego and her integrity. So she packed up her things and moved into her boyfriend's mom's place along with her two children. The boyfriend's mom dealt with them for 2 weeks before realizing how utterly jobless and ill mannered these two were. So she kicked them out as well, only allowing her son to live with her, who very happily accepted the offer, having no care for my sister. Now, with no place to live, she knew she was screwed because not only my parents, but her boyfriend's mom would call the CPS on her for being homeless and having no money to take care of her kids. That is what she told me when she called me and asked me if there was a way I would allow not just her and her kids, but also her boyfriend a place to live. I immediately said no to the idea of her boyfriend here. He's a shady guy and like 3 times worse than my sister. There was absolutely no way I'd allow him a place to live in my house. Well, you all know my sister had absolutely no other choice and took me up on it, deciding to move into our guest room. I guess this pissed off Mr. Macho Man, her boyfriend, because I could just feel the anger through his passive aggressive remarks every time he came over to visit my sister. Well, this wouldn't have been a problem if his remarks were just limited to me. I know what kind of a man he is from the moment I met him and knew to take whatever he said as a grain of salt. Well, I guess he took my silence as me letting him assert his dominance or some BS, because this jobless son of a bee then started throwing remarks at my husband. These remarks weren't just anything, they were extremely emasculating. If it weren't for my nephews, my sister and him both would have been on the streets by now. But my husband and I shut our mouths every time looking at them because we knew we didn't want them to suffer just because their mom made horrible decisions in her life. Well, there is only so much that someone can handle, and both my husband and I had enough. The straw that broke the camel's back was when my husband and I invited my parents over for a small dinner to celebrate my husband's promotion at his workplace. We invited my sister's boyfriend too, and I know that was our first mistake. We all drank a little and enjoyed the meal while engaging in conversation. Well, I don't know why, but my sister's boyfriend had the bright idea to start with his comments once again, and what he said this time made both my husband and I go crazy. This man, who doesn't have the capability to keep a job for the past 4 years, had the sheer audacity to say that my short, effeminate looking husband probably cannot satisfy me, after giving him constant, unwanted advice on fashion and how he can become masculine. Well, obviously, this was it for my husband, and he started yelling at him, asking him, what does he even think of himself? The two of them start to have a little back and forth, and seeing my very non confrontational husband get so angry for the first time made me realize that a boundary had been crossed. So I simply look at my sister, who seemed unbothered by this entire exchange, and also at my parents, who just looked disappointed. I tell my sister that she needs to pack her bags and get out of the house. I tell my parents they can take her with them if they care, but she isn't going to be living with us anymore. I've had enough of her and her stupid little boyfriend acting like they're in high school. The room fell silent, and I guess my sister's pride was hurt once again because she went to pack her and her kids' bags. I guess she thought that her Mr. Macho boyfriend would look after their living situation, but that is simply not the case. When she returns expecting her boyfriend to do something, he simply just says that he is done with taking all this disrespect from our family. Apparently, this is too much for a man with integrity like him and other BS, before leaving and telling my sister to only call him when we're ready to apologize to him. LOL. I guess the realization hits my sister that she's practically homeless because my parents told her that they were not letting her back into their house again. This is when the crocodile tears start rolling down her cheeks and she falls on her knees, begging us to give her a chance. How she will do anything, yada yada. I simply tell her, we're done. I can't take the responsibility of a 24-year-old living like she's 16 anymore, and it was about time she faced the consequences of her actions. It hurt to see my nephew so confused as to what was happening, but I knew for her to have some accountability, she needs to face at least some hardships. So after her crying session didn't end, even after waiting for her, I told her that I might have to call the cops. I guess this is when it hit her, and she left with my nephews. She's been living in her car for the past 2 days, and her kids have already been taken away by the care system. She's been calling me and my parents nonstop, blaming us for everything that's happening with her. The news has reached our relatives too, who are all blaming me for her condition. I know I wasn't wrong for kicking my sister out of the house, but was I? I'm starting to have conflicting feelings about the situation. I know for a fact that I will be contacting the CPS if my sister doesn't get her act together to see what options we have for my nephews. I need some advice, judgment on what to do. AITA. It's been a week since everything went down, and my sister is still unwilling to budge. She still thinks that someone is going to come to save her. The same relatives who berated me previously want nothing to do with her, as she's going from household to household asking for a place to live. Many of my sensible cousins have given her the idea of living at a shelter, but apparently that isn't enough for her. It is heartbreaking to see her have so much entitlement that she cannot even care about what happens to her children who are put in the care system. I guess the reality and depth of the situation still hasn't hit her. It is very saddening to see how unfit she is to not only become a mother, but also to find herself a partner and become a good partner herself. I really don't care about her. I don't, but my heart just breaks for the little kids who must be so confused without their mom. So I decided to call CPS and inquire about my nephews. According to them, they, in fact, are looking to place my nephews into temporary custody and were looking for any relatives for the same. So, when I talked to them, I was informed that I would be able to take them home once the court holds a shelter care hearing. I'm currently waiting on that news right now. We'll update you all once that happens. This is going to be my final update. I last posted about a month ago, and firstly, want to thank all of you for your amazing advice and support. It gave me a lot of good insight during an overwhelming period of my life where I didn't know what to do. So, to start the update on a good note, my nephews have started living with me. I have received temporary custody of them until my sister gets her act right. We have also reached out to my nephew's biological dad. It was surprising to see them so happy to hear from us. It was like the picture my sister painted of them was proven completely wrong, and they've turned out to be so different. Apparently, when they told my sister that they wanted nothing to do with their sons, they meant that they either wanted full custody or for my sister to get her act together. Hell, one of them liked her so much that he was willing to even pay for her therapy just so that she could get her act together. Needless to say, she had declined the offer. I know that they should have still fought for the custody of our nephews, but the thing was that my sister had only told them that they were the fathers once it had been about a year of my nephews being born. This meant that the chances of them gaining sole custody became very slim, since they weren't present in their lives for a while now. Well, I think it's better late than never. So we've started visitation for them. The guys visit us every weekend, and honestly, so far all seems great. Not only my nephews feel happy to see them, but my fathers get along well with each other as well. I hope this is the beginning of a good co parenting relationship between the two of them until my sister comes around. As for her, I guess slowly she's starting to come to her senses. She took up my cousin on the shelter offer after running out of all her money, and she's been doing art commissions through there to make some money of her own. She's also started asking about my nephews, and I guess it is a good sign, but obviously I'm taking it as a grain of salt because this all could just be an act. Overall, I count this as a good update. As far as my nephews, they're well, all is well, and they sure seem to be while having fun with my husband and their dads. NTA, but this is the result of your parents enabling. This action should have been taken long back when your sister had no kids of her own. Unfortunately, the kids now have to be a part of this mess when they did nothing wrong. For that, I would suggest trying for temporary custody. NTA, not your circus, not your monkeys. You have done so much all these years with nothing in return, and this is how your sister decides to pay you back. If I were in your place, I'd ask the relatives who are siding with her to take her in. Let's see where their empathy goes then. I'm a 26-year-old female and I have a younger sister, Maya, 14, female. Me and Maya have different fathers. Mine died before she was even born. He died in April 2006. She was born in October 2007. But hers was a real piece of work. He was a deadbeat, ended up in jail, never had any child support contract, and my mother cut him off completely when Maya was only 2. The issue. Ever since then, my mother has been telling Maya that my dad is her dad too, that he died before she was born. Obviously, the math doesn't add up, but I don't think Maya has ever thought about it. When I was young, I didn't say anything because I was scared. And then when Maya was older, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to add to the confusion. Last week, I was visiting them both, and my mother brought up my father and how he would be so happy to see his two girls doing so well. We were originally talking about my new job in Maya's school. When Maya went up to her room, I told my mother that she needed to tell Maya the truth, that it wasn't fair to either of us for her to keep this secret, and she was borderline disrespecting my father. We almost argued, but it stopped suddenly and she agreed. On Sunday, I asked her again if she had told Maya, which she replied, I really don't think this is a big deal, and she can find out when she's older. I think Maya is old enough to deserve to know this and be able to handle the truth. I don't want to be associated with keeping this lie when the truth eventually comes out. So, yesterday I picked Maya up from school and took her out to get food, where I eventually told her everything, bar some of the really bad things her father did. I tried to be as positive as I could with her, telling her that this didn't change anything and she still meant just as much to me. I stayed with her until my mother called, telling me to bring her home. My mother texted me last night saying I was a selfish bitch for telling Maya, and now Maya wasn't talking to her. That I was so negative that I couldn't even let my sister have one thing, a false assumption of a good father, I guess. And that she, my mother, wanted nothing to do with me after this horrible thing I had done. I don't know. I want third party opinions because I feel like a real POS AITA. NTA, this is never going to be an easy thing to tell your sister, but the older she gets without knowing, the more betrayed she's going to feel. Now that you've said something, the healing can begin. NTA, you are right. Maya is old enough to know the truth. As long as you told her as lovingly as you could and affirmed that she is still loved by her family, yes, you did the right thing. Yes, this was probably a lot for Maya to take in and process, but she will eventually overcome it. Your mother lied to Maya about her father, which was wrong and was never going to tell her. My sister is 30 and hasn't been able to conceive for a while. She tried her hardest to have a baby, but never could. Her doctor told her that she was infertile and couldn't have kids. She was devastated, and I tried my best to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. One Friday evening, she video called me and showed me her positive pregnancy test. I was over the moon. I drove to her house and gave her a big hug and bought her a gift. She asked if she could have some of my son's old clothes. I bought a lot of gender neutral clothes. I agreed and stuffed a bag full of old baby clothes. I gave her bottles, formula, shoes, socks, and coats for her baby, and she was very grateful. After 6 months, I started to notice her bump wasn't growing. I asked her about it, and she got very offended, saying that her baby was just small. I found it strange that a 6-month-old baby hasn't grown at all, but I brushed it off. I kept on noticing small things. She hadn't bought a cot or anything for a baby. She was still eating sushi and food she couldn't have. She had never been to an appointment and she didn't have any ultrasounds of the baby. She told us that her baby was a girl, but didn't buy any girl clothes, but I assumed she was just going to use the stuff I gave her. When 8 months came around, I sat my sister down on my couch and asked her, Are you actually pregnant? She sat silently, but I could see the anger rush through her body. She started crying, asking how I could say such a thing to her. I continued with, I have noticed that you don't look pregnant and you have not bought anything for your baby. She looked at me and in a teary voice replied, I had a miscarriage. I didn't want to tell anyone until I was 9 months and just say it was a complication. I was gobsmacked. I had just accused her of faking a pregnancy when she was grieving the death of her baby. Am I the a hole? NTA, encourage your sister to get therapy. She needs it. NTA, it's your sister, not a casual acquaintance or a stranger. Of course, you're going to ask her something after a few months go by. Is there a husband, partner? I would talk to them discreetly. Your sister is either in terrible grief over the miscarriage, or there was never a baby and she made up the whole thing, or maybe they tried to go surrogate or adoption route and something didn't work. She probably should speak to a counselor.